What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We've ended our discussion of the 12 steps and how the steps help us achieve emotional sobriety. And now I'm going to be coming in with various topics that I think are very, very helpful in terms of us continuing to understand emotional sobriety, what it is, and most importantly, how we can integrate these concepts into our life. You see, for me, psychology is at its best when it speaks to me in terms of something that is practical, that I can apply, that is not intellectual, but actually gives me a way of better dealing with whatever tasks life sets before me. And that's what I've been so excited about in terms of emotional sobriety. Well, today we're going to begin a discussion that's probably going to last over probably the next at least 6 Thursday nights on differentiation. And those of you that have read my books understand that I think that differentiation is a wonderful way to conceptualize what happens to us as we start to develop emotional sobriety and achieve emotional sobriety in our life. So I want to start by giving you an introduction to this concept of differentiation. Now, the person who introduced this into the field of psychiatry was Dr. Murray Bowen. He was a psychiatrist, and he was a psychiatrist, as most psychiatrists were trained back in the 30s and 40s and 50s in they were trained with a psychoanalytic orientation. And some of you may understand Freud's work. I mean, we can kind of boil it down to a few concepts, one of which is that he really brought this idea of an unconscious into discussion in terms of that there are forces that within us that are living us, that are determining how we are reacting to certain stimuli or to certain events in our life. And this turned out to be an incredible contribution. Some of his other ideas, like that life force, this libido he talked about, was controversial, but he saw that as the driving force that shaped our development and how we dealt with those feelings. Other people that came after him kind of criticized his focus on that. But what we're going to take from Freud's work is that there are forces that are going on in our life that are incredibly powerful, that we may not be aware of, that are influencing our reaction to things. So Bowen comes along, and he had a hard time thinking about people in the way that Freud was talking about. And he thought it might make more sense to look at other forces that are shaping a person's life. And he looked at the relational or interpersonal dynamics. And he felt that there was a process that went on in every family that was influencing the development of the members of that family. And he called that process differentiation. And he theorized that differentiation occurred on a scale of 0 to 100. Now, this is a theoretical scale. There was no research done on it, but he said that the low end, the 0 end, is that you're completely an undifferentiated person, Well, if you're completely undifferentiated, the best way I could describe it for you is what I experienced when I was at Fairfield Hills Hospital doing my internship. Fairfield Hills Hospital was a hospital for those people that had severe mental illness. The criminally insane were committed to that facility, but other folks that just could not function on their own and suffered from, chronic schizophrenia, severe mental illness. And I'll never forget, right after I went to my intern in 1986, and after I was on a certain ward that dealt with patients that suffered from the effects of being on what they call at that time was a phenothiazine. And when they were on this drug for a long period of time, the part of their brain that would register that they were satiated in terms of their thirst was damaged. So they could drink unbelievably large quantities of water and not feel like they had now satisfied their thirst. And so on this ward, these are people that are already incredibly disorganized, but now they get violent, they start acting out. And so it was like they were drinking alcohol. So what they had to do was shut down the bathrooms, because the patients would literally go in there and stick their head in the toilet and just continue to drink all of the water out of the toilet. And they wouldn't stop. You'd have to pull them out, just like somebody going after a bottle of alcohol. So they had to control any access to fluids whatsoever on this ward. Well, some of the patients that were doing better than others got a pass to go on the grounds of the hospital with several technicians and therapists with them to go visit what was called the snack chat or the snack house. I called it the snack chat center because all these patients got together and kind of talked to each other. And it was like the scene in Star Wars. You remember the first one when they go on that planet, when they're looking to get a ship to deliver that message that was in R2-D2? I swear to God, it was so bizarre. So I go there. This is my first time. I'm like at the internship for a week, and I'm going to this snack chat shack. And this patient comes up to me. He's got a tie on his head with the tie coming off the side of his head. He's got his shirt all buttoned up, and he walks up to me and he gets real close to my face. He's maybe an inch from my nose. And he looks at me and he says, "I am you." And he goes, "You are me." And he's fascinated by this, that he was completely fused with me. He was completely undifferentiated. And he fused himself to whoever was around in his environment. So that's an example of this low end of differentiation. You have no sense of yourself and your separateness from others, that you are completely joined and fused with them. Well, at the other end of Bowen's spectrum of this emotional differentiation was a person who has a very clear sense of self. He would say that their self was well differentiated, which means that they had a very clear sense of who they were, what was important to them, what their values were, what they wanted, what they didn't want. That this person that was self-differentiated was self-determined, that they checked in with themselves in terms of if somebody asked them to do something, to see if that's what they really wanted to do. And if they didn't, they honored themselves, but they would also stay in relationship to the person and check out with the person how important it was. And sometimes they could change their mind. So it wasn't like they were selfish. It's just that they included themselves. They didn't do things out of obligation, a sense of obligation, or that they should be this way or they should be that way. They didn't operate from that. They operated from a sense of autonomy. So he said that our development exists along this line from this very low differentiation to high differentiation. And the lower our differentiation is, the more interdependent we are in our relationships in terms of our functioning. Which means if I'm in a relationship with Kathy, she's my partner. If I'm low differentiated, then whatever Kathy does has a huge impact on how I feel and what I do. And if something happens where there's some kind of a difference between us, I will feel threatened by that difference because it means that we're not together and we're not connected. So I will react to that threat. First of all, that threat will create an intense amount of anxiety. And I'm going to have to find some way of now calming that anxiety. So all of my behavior is going to be directed at getting our relationship to the point where I feel fused again with her and that I'm not going to lose her. So let's say that she wanted to do something I didn't want her to do. I will do my best to try to get her to stop doing that so I don't feel threatened. And then if she lets me control her, then I'm going to say, oh, now I'm okay. She's not doing that thing that's threatening me. Now, obviously, at that point, am I thinking about Kathy at all? Of course I'm not. When I'm undifferentiated, I'm just concerned about myself. Even if it looks like I'm concerned about you, I'm only concerned about you in terms of being able to manipulate you to get you to do what I want you to do so I feel okay. So I can do that by overtly trying to control you or covertly trying to control you. So the more undifferentiated I am, the more interdependent I am with you. As my differentiation increases, I'm less interdependent on you. And now what you do is not going to have overly influence my behavior. Now, the emotions that I develop, when I'm undifferentiated, are going to be more about reacting to my level of undifferentiation. And I cannot, when my level of differentiation is low, my consciousness is now a function of that differentiation. I can't see things any differently. I gave you the example of a boy who was 4 years old, who got only 2 cookies from his mom when his brother that was 15 got 4 cookies. And that boy was throwing a fit. Why don't I have as many cookies as my brother? And then when his mother picked up a butter knife and cut his 2 cookies in half, so he now had 4 cookies, he was okay. In his consciousness, now he had the same number of cookies as his brother. You and I know that he didn't. He still had half as many cookies, even though they were cut in half. They weren't the same as what his brother had. But because his consciousness only saw the number, the quantity, he couldn't think of the substance. Well, the same thing happens with our undifferentiation. So what Bowen said was, in every family, families operate as an emotional unit. When you are born into your family of origin, your parents are operating at a certain level of differentiation. They've come to to this new family they're creating with their partner with the highest level of differentiation from their parents, and your partner's coming with the highest level from their parents. Now, in our society, that's not good news. In our society, probably the highest level of differentiation, unless you're a very special person and done a hell of a lot of work on yourself, is around 50. That's not very high. Trust me, when you understand this scale and what it means to be at 50, it means we're taking a lot of things personally, that we're very reactive, that we don't have that sense of autonomy that we'd really like to have, that sense of emotional freedom. We're still very reactive to what's going on in our relationship, highly interdependent, what we call emotional dependency. So your parents are going to come into their life somewhere between a 30 and a 50 in terms of their level of differentiation. Well, what they impart to us is we're growing up, we can only grow to the level, the highest level that they've ever achieved, which isn't saying a lot. That's why I say that we're victims of victims. And in that way, nobody's a victim because we're victims of victims. They gave us the best that they could. It's never enough. There's so much more that we can learn, that we can develop. But we leave our family with that level of differentiation. And when we go out in the world and interact, if somebody is a lot more differentiated than us, we're not going to be in a relationship with them because we're not going to feel like we can relate to them. And if their differentiation is a lot lower than us, we're not going to be able to be in a relationship with them because there's no connection. So we find someone, what does it say? Water seeks its own level. Well, differentiation seeks its own level. You find someone that's a plus or minus 5 or 10 points from where you're at. You're not going to find, now, it's always, when I say this, you always think, yeah, I'm much higher than my partner. We all think that. My God, they got a lot of growing to do. The truth is that we're right in the same range. So if you're critical of them and how they function in the world, guess what it means? You're in the same boat. You're in the same boat. So it does no good to look at them and blame them because you're functioning in the same, at the same level. Now, different. I mean, you may be able to handle certain things different than your partner because your family functioned differently and you had different experiences. But overall, we're going to pick someone that's at the same level of emotional differentiation that we are. Now, Bowen said that he didn't think that we could change this much over the course of life. And in that way, he agreed with Freud. Freud really thought that a lot of these experiences in our early childhood were deterministic, that they determined how we were going to function later. And it took psychoanalysis 5 days a week for 10 years, for you to turn that around. Hell of a lot of work. Bowen was more leaning on that side. Those people that are Bowenian therapists today are much more optimistic than the first wave of the Bowen therapists. And those of us that look at this really think that there's so many possibilities to grow ourselves. And that's been my experience when I see people grow in AA and in NA and the other 12-step groups, is that, it's remarkable what I see people doing. So this level of differentiation determines to what degree we're influenced by our partner, by what's going on with our partner. Now, the way I will talk about differentiation for you is I will take it from beyond relationships with other people, but to relationships with life. Because I believe the same thing happens in our relationship to the experiences we're having that happens in our relationship with our partner, meaning that when I'm undifferentiated, then I'm very dependent on things going a certain way in my life for me to be okay. So the final thing I'll say about this before inviting Roger in, and like I said, we're going to have a lot to say about differentiation over the next weeks, is that when my differentiation is low, then my behavior is incredibly rigid. There is no flexibility. Things must be this way for me to be okay. One way you can see this is if you go to a family's house during Christmas. If there's assigned seating, it's an indication of low differentiation. Oh, you can't sit there. That's daddy's chair. Daddy has to sit in that chair because that's the only chair daddy can feel okay in. When your differentiation raises, you don't have that rigidity. When you have that rigidity, it means it's very hard to adapt to changing circumstances in your life, to changes in another person or in your partner. that when you're undifferentiated, you want things to be the way they were. So we have an incredible amount of difficulty in terms of letting go of what was and being able to appreciate what is, because we glorify what was. So when we're undifferentiated, one of the hardest things for us to deal with is disappointment. It's terrible. When we're disappointed, we either make ourselves terribly wrong and turn it all on ourselves, or we attack the other person and blame them. By the way, that's the other thing that's characteristic. Low differentiation, blame is the name of the game. We're always looking for whose fault it is. As we raise our differentiation, blame becomes irrelevant in our language. So that's just a beginning discussion of this. We're going to be digging into this more and more and more over the next few weeks. So without further ado, let me invite Roger and Tom in to join us tonight. And I imagine Roger's with us.
Yep, Roger's here.
Yes. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Alan. Hey, Tom.
How's your differentiation doing tonight, you guys?
Mine's a 10. I got a 10.
Jesus. Yeah. He doesn't realize the scale was from 0 to 100. So what he just told us, just above schizophrenia.
I'm being honest. We are the same. You and I are the same.
Even Murray Bowen acknowledged that on his best days, I think he was maybe 60-ish or 70-ish, Tom. Best days. So you are
Murray Bowen, which
you are super Bowenian, Tom.
Listen, Murray Bowen. I also like to comment on his ability as a stand-up comic. If anybody's ever watched Murray Bowen present, he's hilarious, and not really. I made that up. But no, I don't know what number I am. I'm not good with numbers. I'm not good with math. But I do want to say, Alan, I thought about it this way when you just finished saying that. Low differentiated people, disappointment is either desperation or betrayal. Either I'm desperately upset because I'm that disappointed, or you have betrayed me if I'm a narcissist. And narcissists are absolutely, they may be 10s depending on where they are with their narcissism, but because everybody is in fact an extension of them. They believe they have a sense of themselves, but they basically include everybody and everything into their definition of self. So, and since I'm talking, I'll just say the couple of quick things. Sharon Cruz said at the time I was at one of her workshops. She was talking about what you were talking about, Alan, about us thinking that I'm so much healthier than somebody, or a lot of times I get clients who basically do the opposite, and they go, oh, my spouse has been in therapy so much longer than me. They're so much farther along. And I'm going like, it really isn't a competition like that. It doesn't really measure that way. And but Sharon said, had this line that she said, we are attracted to the same levels of expression and repression as ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's like, and then the other example I would give of that is I was at a Pat Love workshop one time. She was doing the Imagos thing and talking about how we find ourselves in relationship with people like our parents. And I asked her the simple question, and it really made a huge difference in my life. I said, my mom was depressed and angry, and I said, why wouldn't I just want to grow up and marry a happy woman? And of course, she said this wonderful thing that at the time I just didn't get. I didn't know it, but it's like it. But she said, no. She says, unconsciously, you were all trying to finish unfinished business. So she said, you didn't want to find a happy woman. You wanted to find an unhappy woman you could finally make happy. And I thought that's why we do get attracted to people that are not necessarily like us, but at the same level of expression and repression. Mm. I look forward to this conversation as we go on.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom and Al. For those of you you know, attending this meeting, if you're like me, as soon as Alan starts talking about this, my mind starts going, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, this is good. This is not good. This is the ways I'm undifferentiated. These are the ways I'm a little bit differentiated, maybe, and on and on. I'm more than or less than this other person. So I just want to call attention to that. If, like me, you have a part of your mind that all of a sudden starts going into, you know, rights and wrongs and should and shouldn'ts and all of that stuff, because it's, for me, it's just a natural tendency to start to do that. But I need to kind of try to slow myself down and calm myself down in that process, because again, we can turn any of these ideas into shoulds and into shouldn'ts. And a lot of what Alan has talked about for the last, 2 years regarding emotional dependency and regarding emotional sobriety, this is a very central concept. That's why he and we are wanting to devote several meetings to it. But to the best extent possible, just it can be an anxiety-provoking concept. It can be a concept we turn into a lot of shoulds around. And I just have to try to kind of watch part of my mind as I do that, and hopefully not take it too seriously, right? Because the goal is awareness, right? The goal is to learn what my tendencies are. A couple of them that Alan talked about that I want to highlight. Alan said he's expanded the idea of differentiation beyond relationship differentiation to our relationship to life. And that's exactly what Bill W. said. He was reliant on people and circumstances, over-reliant. Again, it's not bad that we are all influenced to some degree by that. That means we're connected. But if it's too strong, it can be absolutely debilitating, as those of us who can be profound people pleasers, the 3 Ps, discover in life. It can be crippling, right? I also, which I was having some thoughts of today, we can talk about differentiation in terms of our self-relationship a lot too. We can be hyper differentiated among different aspects of ourself. One part of us can take charge and has no perspective. The next day, how we're going to be looking back at the same situation and seeing it totally differently, right? So differentiation has a lot of applications, but the key pieces are, can I deal with life on life's terms? Or if life doesn't go the way that I expect it to and demand it to, am I in deep trouble? Because it just provokes too darn much anxiety for me. And those are the kind of awarenesses that can be very helpful for me to have. It can be hard to acknowledge it. None of us like feeling anxious. None of us like acknowledging anxiety. None of us like looking closely at the ways we try to control our partner, either through passivity or through intimidation or through withdrawal, or all the ways, both covert and overt, as Alan said. But when I'm anxious, and I feel like my well-being is very dependent on how my partner is treating me, on what choices they're making, I'm going to feel a powerful impulse to start trying to control their behavior. That's not a bad thing. That's just how I developed. If I could start to see that, then that gives me a little fulcrum point. It gives me a little entry point, right? Into starting to look more deeply and develop a deeper understanding of that pattern in my life. As we've talked about many times, if I blame someone for that, whether it's mom and dad or whoever, myself, if I judge it in myself, if I shame myself for it, all of those become obstacles to taking a look at it, just trying to see what's going on in a friendlier kind of way. So that's all I want to say to it for now.
It's really good, Raj, because see what you're really inviting people to do, and this is it's a characteristic of being more differentiated, is that we try to be more objective and curious about these things than judgmental and critical. And see, that's one of the differences. As our consciousness changes, now we go, oh, isn't this interesting? Just one other thing I'd say about this before we open it up is that I was reading Rollo May the other day, and he made this great observation. He said that in order to experience our freedom, we must first be able to see how we're not free. Yeah. How determined our behavior is by these forces that are operating. And our path to freedom is not to somehow bypass that and try to jump onto the other side, but to embrace it and to look at it and start to see just in how reactive I really am, how dependent I really am, how interdependent I really am, how manipulative I become. And like you said, to do it from that point of view, like, wow, isn't this interesting where I'm at? Now, what can I do to start changing that? It's what happens in the first step in our program. We admitted we were powerless. So we admitted we are powerless to find another power. But thank you.
It's the healing power of awareness is what you're talking about. And acceptance.
Paradox, right? The paradox.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Always. It's and Roger, if I understood you correctly, you like to be judged and you wanted to know what I thought your differentiation number was tonight. And there you go.
There you go.
I hope that helps.
You discovered I really do live on another planet, and I have no connection whatsoever to
Roger, you and I are one.
Go ahead.
Somebody in the chat just said, hey, is individuation the way that Jung talked about it similar to differentiation? And yes, that's true. Mm-hmm. I think they're very, very similar to it, right? It's very similar. And you're going to see as we talk about this thing, we talk about other theories and stuff, a lot of people were talking about the same thing from different perspectives. And so understand that when we look at the world through the lens of differentiation, that's just one possibility. There's going to be several others. I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.